My daughter-in-law locked me out of my own house after transferring my $2 million property. She never expected my revenge. That was the headline, wasn't it? The one the whispers in our little town started with, long before the official paperwork even hit the county recorder's office. They loved drama, my neighbors. They just didn't know the half of it, not even a fraction. They saw a polished woman, a homeowner, a matriarch. They saw Martha Sterling, widow of Robert Sterling, the man who built half the businesses in this county. They didn't see the fear that had been a constant companion for years, a gnawing dread that tightened its grip every time I looked at my son, David, or, more accurately, at the woman he'd married, Amelia. It all started subtly, like a hairline fracture in a foundation. Robert had passed away 5 years before Amelia ever set foot in my life. He'd been a generous man, not just with his money, but with his trust. He'd always believed in me, in our marriage, in our future, and he'd been smart enough to set things up so that his wealth, our wealth, was protected, or so I thought. When he died, everything was clear. The trust, the properties, the investments, they were all managed, with me at the helm. It wasn't about control for control's sake. It was about honoring his legacy, about ensuring our children and grandchildren were taken care of, and about maintaining the life we had built together. I was good at it too. I'd always been organized, meticulous. Robert used to joke I could balance a checkbook in my sleep. And I'd poured myself into managing his estate, into keeping it growing, into preserving its integrity. It was my purpose, my way of staying connected to him, of feeling his presence even after he was gone. David, my only child, was different. He was the artistic soul, the dreamer. Robert and I had always worried about him, about his ability to navigate the practicalities of the world. We'd tried to instill a sense of responsibility, of hard work, but he'd always seemed more interested in abstract concepts, in fleeting inspiration. He'd flitted from one creative pursuit to another, never quite landing on anything stable. We'd supported him, of course. What parent wouldn't? We'd set him up with a small gallery, funded his various projects, always with the implicit understanding that there would be something more substantial for him, for his future, when the time was right. But even then, there was a disconnect. He rarely asked about the business, about the estate. He'd nod vaguely when I explained financial matters, his eyes already drifting to some distant point. Then Amelia arrived. She swept into David's life like a vibrant, exotic bird. She was beautiful, undeniably so, tall, with long dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. She was also ambitious, sharp, and, I quickly realized, utterly captivated by David's inheritance, not David himself. I saw it in the way her gaze lingered on the Sterling name, on the sprawling estate we lived in, on the vintage cars Robert had so meticulously maintained. It wasn't just about wanting a comfortable life. It was about wanting this life, the one David was born into, the one I had earned. The wedding was a lavish affair, paid for, naturally, by the Sterling estate. I tried. I really did. I wanted to welcome Amelia into our family, to embrace her as a daughter. But every interaction felt like an audition, and I was failing. She'd ask probing questions about our finances, not out of curiosity, but with a clinical precision that felt unnerving. She'd compliment my taste in art, then subtly steer the conversation towards David's potential and how it was being underutilized because he was being burdened by his mother's management of the estate. It was a constant, subtle chipping away, a narrative she was carefully constructing, not just for David, but I suspected for anyone who would listen. David, bless his impressionable heart, seemed to be lapping it up. He'd always been a bit of a mama's boy, but Amelia seemed to be rewriting his entire filial code. He started to echo her sentiments, his own voice, once so soft and uncertain, now carrying a new, harder edge when he spoke about my role. He'd say things like, "Mom, Amelia just thinks it's time I took a more active role." Or, "She's just looking out for our future, you know?" My future? What about our future? What about the future Robert and I had painstakingly built, the future I was actively protecting? The real shift, the seismic tremor that shook the very foundations of my world, came on my 70th birthday. It was supposed to be a celebration, a gathering of family and close friends at the main house. I'd planned a lovely dinner, something intimate, but Amelia had other ideas. She insisted on a larger event, a showcase, she called it. David, predictably, sided with her. I felt a prickle of unease, but I deferred. I didn't want to cause a scene, not on my birthday. The party was overwhelming. Far too many people I didn't know, all milling around, admiring the artwork, the antique furniture, the sheer opulence of it all. Amelia, in a stunning designer gown, was the undisputed queen of the evening, gliding from group to group, charming everyone with her easy grace. David was by her side, looking uncharacteristically confident, almost proud. I watched them from across the room, a hollow ache growing in my chest. It felt like I was a guest in my own home, and observer at my own celebration. Later that evening, after most of the guests had departed, leaving behind a lingering scent of expensive perfume in a faint disarray, Amelia approached me. David was trailing behind her, a nervous energy emanating from him. "Martha," she began, her voice smooth as silk, but with an undertone of steel that was becoming increasingly familiar. "David and I have been doing a lot of talking." I'd braced myself for this. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken tension. I took a slow sip of my champagne, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "Oh, about what, dear?" "About the future," she said, her eyes locking onto mine, unwavering. "About the estate. About how it's managed." David shifted his weight, avoiding my gaze. It was a telltale sign. He was uncomfortable, but he wouldn't speak up. He never did. "I've been managing it for 20 years, Amelia," I said, my voice steady. "Robert trusted me completely." "And he was a wonderful man, Martha," Amelia replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. "But he's gone now, and times have changed. David is his son, his heir, and as his wife, I feel it's only right that we have a more direct say in how things are run." "A direct say?" I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "I've always kept you informed. David knows everything." "He knows what you tell him," she countered, her tone sharpening. "And frankly, Martha, we've realized that there are inefficiencies, redundancies. Things could be streamlined, optimized for a more modern approach." Modern approach. It was code. Code for her wanting her hands on the reins. Code for her wanting to dismantle everything Robert and I had built and reshape it in her own image. "Robert's will was very clear," I stated, my voice firm. "I have full control of the trust and all assets until my death." Amelia let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. It was a chilling sound. "Oh, Martha, we've already taken care of that." My heart gave a violent lurch. "Taking care of what?" David finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom, Amelia had a lawyer look into things. There were some clauses about your capacity to manage the estate." "Capacity? My capacity? I, Martha Sterling, who had navigated complex financial markets, who had overseen multi-million-dollar transactions, who had maintained a sprawling estate and a charitable foundation, suddenly lacked the capacity? The sheer audacity of it sent a wave of cold fury through me. "What clauses?" I demanded, my voice rising. Amelia stepped forward, her posture regal, almost victorious. "Robert, bless his soul, was very thorough. He anticipated certain eventualities. There were provisions made in case of diminished mental faculties or incapacitation. Provisions that, upon review by a qualified legal team and with David's full consent, could necessitate a temporary or even permanent transfer of management responsibilities." Temporary? Permanent? The room began to spin, my own son standing beside his wife, nodding along to this twisted narrative. It was a betrayal so profound, so absolute, that it felt like a physical blow. "David," I whispered, my voice cracking, "is this true?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and something akin to a desperate plea for understanding. "Mom, Amelia, she showed me the papers. She explained it all. It's for the best." "For all of us." "For all of us?" The words echoed in the cavernous space of my grief and disbelief. He truly believed it. He'd been so thoroughly manipulated, so blinded by Amelia's ambition and his own inherent passivity, that he'd signed away his mother's life, his inheritance, his very legacy. "The property," I said, my voice regaining a chilling calm. "The house, my home, that $2 million property. You said you transferred management?" Amelia smiled, a triumphant, predatory gleam in her eyes. "The deed, Martha, it's been transferred. To a trust that David and I control. It's all legally sound." The deed, transferred. My home, the place where Robert and I had raised David, the place filled with decades of memories. the place that was legally and emotionally mine. They had stolen it. While I was celebrating my 70th birthday, while I was feeling like an outsider, they had been orchestrating my eviction. I looked at David, at the man he had become, the puppet of a woman I had never truly trusted. I looked at Amelia, her victory etched in every line of her face. And in that moment, something broke inside me. Not a surrender, but a hardening. A chilling realization that the world I had known, the family I had loved, had been a carefully constructed facade, and the people I thought I could count on were the very ones poised to destroy me. The humiliation was a raw, open wound, but beneath it, a new, dangerous emotion began to stir. It was cold. It was precise. It was the beginning of a plan. The whispers in town had started with the headline. They had no idea the story had barely begun. This was not the end. This was the spark. And I would not be locked out of my own life. Not now. Not ever. The silence that fell between us was deafening, broken only by the frantic beating of my own heart, a drumbeat of a war that had just been declared. I walked away from them that night, not defeated, but forged anew in the fires of their betrayal. The house was theirs, for now, but the sterling legacy, that was a different matter entirely. The stillness that followed Amelia's pronouncement, that chillingly serene declaration of their ownership, was more deafening than any scream. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room, out of my lungs. David stood there, a ghost in his own life, his eyes darting between me and Amelia, a pantomime of filial obligation and wifely dominion. The word trust hung in the air, a poisoned barb, a perversion of everything Robert and I had intended. He'd set up trusts, yes, to protect us, to provide. He'd never, in his wildest nightmares, envisioned a trust as a tool for dispossession, wielded by the very woman I'd warned him about, and executed by the son I dedicated my life to. I walked out of that room, out of my home, with nothing but the clothes on my back and the icy calm that had descended over me. The sheer, audacious criminality of it all was, in a perverse way, liberating.
Robert's meticulous planning, his foresight, it had all been twisted, perverted. But he'd also built something substantial, something that wasn't just bricks and mortar, but a network, a legacy. They'd stolen my house, my sanctuary. They hadn't stolen my mind. They hadn't stolen my knowledge. And they certainly hadn't stolen my name. Martha Sterling. The name still carried weight. It still opened doors, though perhaps not the ones I'd expected. The first few days were a blur of shock and simmering rage. I stayed at a small, nondescript motel on the edge of town, a far cry from the sprawling estate that had been my prison for the past few weeks. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant car horn, felt like a taunt. Amelia's face, smug and triumphant, flashed behind my eyelids. David's pathetic, guilt-ridden gaze. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd simply erased me. I'd always been a woman of routine, of order. Robert's death had shattered that, and Amelia's coup had shattered it again. But Robert had also taught me resilience. He'd built his empire from the ground up, facing down adversity, outmaneuvering competitors. He'd always said that the true measure of a person wasn't how they handled success, but how they navigated the inevitable storms. This was my storm, and I was not going to drown. My first call wasn't to a lawyer, though that would come. It was to Mr. Henderson. He'd been Robert's closest confidant, his legal counsel for decades, a man of unwavering integrity, sharp as a tack even in his late 70s. He'd been instrumental in setting up Robert's estate, and I trusted him implicitly. He answered on the third ring, his voice a familiar, gravelly rumble. "Martha, is that you? For heaven's sake, where are you?" His concern was palpable, a lifeline in the swirling chaos. I told him everything. The party, Amelia's accusations, David's acquiescence, the transfer of the deed, the trust. I omitted nothing. I kept my voice even, factual, betraying none of the roiling tempest within. He listened, his silence punctuated by occasional sharp intakes of breath. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Martha," he finally said, his voice grave, "this is reprehensible, utterly reprehensible. Robert would be incandescent with rage, and so am I." "They used his own foresight against me, Arthur," I said, my voice tight. "They twisted his provisions for my protection into a weapon of dispossession. They used a loophole, Martha, a very specific one, I'll grant you, but one that requires a concerted effort and, frankly, a significant amount of avarice. Robert trusted your judgment implicitly. He believed you would always act in the best interest of the family. He never envisioned this." "David consented," I stated flatly. Amelia said he consented. Henderson sighed. "David has always been malleable, easily swayed by strong personalities, particularly those he perceives as offering him stability."
Amelia has clearly played on his insecurities and his desire for ease. It's a textbook manipulation, Martha. And the fact that they involved a lawyer, that's where it gets complicated. Complicated for them, I corrected, a dangerous edge creeping into my tone. Not for me. I want to understand everything, Arthur. Every detail, every nuance of Robert's will, the trust documents, the deed transfer. I want to know exactly how they did this, and more importantly, how they can be undone. Over the next few days, Mr. Henderson and I worked tirelessly. He brought sealed files from his private vault, documents that had been locked away since Robert's passing. We pored over them in his dimly lit office, the scent of old paper and leather filling the air. Henderson meticulously explained the intricacies of Robert's estate, the carefully constructed trusts designed to safeguard generations. He showed me the clause Amelia and her hired gun had exploited, a clause Robert had insisted upon, allowing for the reassignment of management if the primary beneficiary was deemed incapable of managing the estate. It was a safety net meant to protect me from any unforeseen personal crisis, not to be weaponized by a greedy daughter-in-law. Robert's intention was to ensure continuity, Henderson explained, pointing to a specific paragraph. If you, for any reason, became incapacitated, a serious illness, an accident, he wanted to ensure David could step in seamlessly, with the oversight of a trusted legal professional, of course. He never contemplated a scenario where David would be coerced into signing away your ownership, and certainly not with Amelia orchestrating it. We discovered that Amelia had indeed used a slick, aggressive lawyer from a downtown firm known for its aggressive litigation tactics. They'd presented David with a carefully crafted narrative, a scenario where I was becoming overwhelmed by the estate's complexities, where my independent management was putting his inheritance at risk. They'd even fabricated some vague reports hinting at financial missteps that never occurred. David, in his naive desire to please and his deep-seated fear of responsibility, had been convinced. He'd signed the consent forms, the power of attorney, the very documents that had stripped me of my home and my agency. But as Henderson and I dug deeper, a new layer of Amelia's deception began to reveal itself. It wasn't just about David's consent. It was about the trust itself. Amelia hadn't just transferred the deed to a trust controlled by David and herself. She transferred it to a shell corporation she'd established months prior, a move designed to obscure ownership and potentially siphon assets. The trust was merely a facade, a legal fiction to legitimize the transfer in David's eyes. "This is more than just avarice, Martha," Henderson said, his brow furrowed. "This is calculated theft. She's using the trust as a smokescreen."
The property, the equity, she's planning to move it, to dissolve it into her own holdings. Robert's legacy, she's systematically dismantling it for her own gain. A cold, hard resolve settled over me. They thought they'd locked me out. They thought they'd silenced me. But they had underestimated the strength of Robert's planning. And more importantly, they had underestimated my own. Robert had built an empire, not just of money, but of relationships, of influence. He had allies, people who understood the Sterling name, people who owed him, people who respected him, and I knew them all. My humiliation had been profound. The feeling of being an intruder in my own life, the betrayal by my own son. It had been a raw, gaping wound. But it had also been the catalyst. It had forced me to shed the facade of polite matriarch, the woman who tried to keep the peace, who deferred to her son and his choices, however misguided. I had been Martha Sterling, wife and mother. Now I was Martha Sterling, inheritor of a legacy, and a woman with a very specific, very targeted mission. I started small, discreet inquiries, reaching out to old business associates of Robert's, men and women who had weathered storms alongside him. I didn't mention David or Amelia. I spoke of Robert, of his vision, of his enduring legacy. I mentioned the Sterling Foundation, the philanthropic arm Robert had established, and how its continued funding and operational integrity were paramount. I spoke of the estate, of its complexities, and the need for experienced guidance. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, offering support, advice, and, most importantly, resources. A former CEO of one of Robert's companies, a man named Frank Peterson, a gruff but loyal friend, was particularly incisive. The Shell Corporation, Martha, he'd sat over a clandestine lunch at a quiet country club, far from Amelia's usual haunts. That's her playbook. She's trying to move assets off the books. It's messy, but it's also traceable. If she thinks she's playing in the dark, she's mistaken. Robert Sterling always had eyes everywhere, and so do I. He explained how shell corporations operate, how funds are moved, how accountants can be bribed or coerced. He introduced me to a forensic accountant, a sharp woman named Eleanor Vance, who specialized in corporate malfeasance. Eleanor's eyes lit up with a dangerous gleam when I explained Amelia's actions. A corporate veil, Eleanor said, tapping a pen against her notepad, and she's trying to make it as opaque as possible. But every transaction leaves a trace. Every wire transfer, every offshore account. It's a digital footprint, and we're very good at following those footprints. Meanwhile, I began to subtly undermine Amelia's narrative within our circle, not with accusations, but with pointed questions disguised as concern.
I'd call old family friends, ostensibly to check in, and I'd casually mention David's recent career changes, his newfound interest in property development. I'd feign ignorance about his involvement in the estate, expressing surprise that he was taking on such significant responsibilities so quickly, especially without more formal training. It was a slow burn, a planting of seeds of doubt. The breaking point, the moment the facade began to truly crack for David, came during the annual Sterling Foundation Gala. It was an event I always chaired, an event I had poured my heart into for years, raising millions for local charities. This year, Amelia, with David by her side, had insisted on taking the lead. I was invited, of course, a guest in the house that was no longer mine, attending the event I had built. The atmosphere was electric, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension I'd felt at my birthday party. Amelia, draped in a gown that screamed new money, trying desperately to look like old money, was working the room, basking in the adulation. David, however, seemed off. He'd lost weight, his eyes held a perpetual look of weariness, and he kept glancing towards me, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. During the silent auction, as Amelia was schmoozing with a potential major donor, I approached David. He flinched slightly as I came near, his hands immediately going into his pockets. "David," I said softly, keeping my voice low and even. "Are you well?" He hesitated, then offered a weak smile. "Mom, yes, I'm fine. Just a lot going on." "I can see that," I replied, my gaze drifting towards the display's gaudy diamond necklace, a recent acquisition by Amelia that had raised eyebrows. "Amelia seems to be enjoying herself, and so are you, I hope." He avoided my eyes. It's a lot of pressure, Mom, running this, all the decisions." "It is," I agreed, "and you've taken on a tremendous burden. I do hope you understand the full scope of what you've signed on for." He shifted uncomfortably. "Amelia handles most of the legal and financial details. She's brilliant at it, you know that." "I know she's brilliant at acquiring things, David," I said, my voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "And I know that Robert's trust was designed to protect this family, not to fund one person's extravagant lifestyle. Have you seen where the funds from the sale of the Riverside property went, David?" His eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing his face. "Riverside? Amelia said that was a necessary divestment." "Divestment?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping me. "It was sold for millions, David, millions that have since vanished. Amelia claims they were reinvested into new ventures, but Eleanor Vance, a forensic accountant I've engaged to review the estate's finances, has found no trace of that money within any legitimate Sterling entity."
Unless, of course, you consider a newly formed offshore account in the Cayman Islands a legitimate venture. The color drained from David's face. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The carefully constructed illusion Amelia had built around him was starting to crumble. He'd been so focused on the immediate, on the perceived security Amelia offered, that he hadn't considered the ultimate destination of the money. Cayman Islands? He stammered. No, that can't be right. Amelia said. Amelia said a lot of things, David, I cut in, my voice now laced with a cold authority that he hadn't heard from me in years. She said you were protecting your inheritance. She said she was streamlining operations. She said Robert's will required this. All lies, David. Every single word was a calculated lie designed to manipulate you into giving her carte blanche to drain Robert's legacy. The house, David, that was just the first step. His gaze fell to the floor, his shoulders slumping. The confident facade he'd worn for Amelia was gone, replaced by the lost, uncertain boy I'd always known, now drowning in a sea of his own regret and betrayal. He was beginning to see it, the sheer, devastating scale of Amelia's greed and his own unwitting complicity. Just then, Amelia herself approached, her smile wide, her eyes scanning the room. "David, darling, Mr. Henderson is asking for you. Something about a legal matter concerning the foundation's endowments. He seemed quite insistent." David's head snapped up, his eyes meeting mine again, a dawning horror in their depths. Henderson. He'd contacted Henderson. He knew everything. I need to go, David mumbled, his voice tight with a newly awakened fear. He practically fled towards where Henderson stood, a small, concerned smile on his face, the architect of Amelia's unraveling. Amelia watched him go, a frown marring her perfect brow. She turned to me, her smile faltering, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. "What did you say to him, Martha?" I met her gaze, my own unwavering, the cold calm of the motel room now a hardened resolve within me. "I told him the truth, Amelia, something you seem to have conveniently forgotten." Her eyes narrowed, a predatory glint replacing the forced pleasantry. "You think you can undo this? You think you can turn David against me? You're desperate, Martha. You've lost everything." "Have I?" I countered, a slow smile spreading across my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had just cornered her prey. "You think taking my house was the end of the story? You think a simple deed transfer and a manipulated son is enough to dismantle Robert Sterling's life's work? You've made a grave error, Amelia. You've underestimated me, and you've underestimated the power of a legacy built on more than just greed." The air crackled with unspoken threats. She saw it then, the shift. The moment her smug victory began to sour, the moment she realized the game was far from over. She might have locked me out of my house, but she had just opened the door to my retribution. The whispers in town had been about a wronged woman. Soon, they would be about a woman who took back what was hers, with a precision and a fury that would make even Robert Sterling proud. And David, caught in the crossfire of his own decisions, was about to witness the true power of his mother, a power he had so carelessly allowed to be usurped. The gala glittered around us, a stage set for a reckoning, and I knew with chilling certainty that this was just the beginning of their downfall. The hum of the ballroom, the clinking of champagne flutes, the orchestrated laughter, it all became a dull roar as Amelia's eyes met mine. For the first time since that devastating birthday party, her mask of feigned composure slipped, revealing a flicker of genuine unease. It was a fleeting moment, easily dismissed as a trick of the light, but I saw it, and in that instant, I knew she sensed the tectonic shift beneath her perfectly manicured feet. David's panicked flight towards Henderson, his eyes wide with a dawning terror, had been the first tremor. My quiet conversation, laced with venom disguised as concern, had been the seismic shock. The rest of the evening was a carefully choreographed performance. Amelia, recovering her poise with remarkable speed, plastered on a radiant smile and returned to her fervent networking, her every move designed to project an image of unwavering control. David, meanwhile, was a ghost at his own party, his gaze darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. I watched him from a distance, a complex mixture of pity and cold satisfaction churning within me. He was a pawn, yes, but a pawn who was beginning to understand the magnitude of the game he'd been forced to play, and the player who had moved him was about to pay the price. The following weeks were a masterclass in strategic dismantling. Arthur Henderson, working with Eleanor Vance's forensic reports, built a case so ironclad, so meticulously detailed, that it would have made Robert himself nod in approval. They traced every dollar Amelia had moved, every shell corporation she had established, every hidden account she had funded. It wasn't a quick process.
Amelia, guided by her aggressive lawyer, fought tooth and nail, attempting to bury them in legal motions and obfuscation. But they were relentless. They had the truth, and they had the power of Robert Sterling's name backing them. While Henderson and Vance worked their magic in the legal arena, I worked my own, quieter campaign of influence. I revisited Robert's inner circle, not as a grieving widow, but as a formidable businesswoman with a clear agenda. I met with the heads of Sterling Enterprises' key divisions, men and women who had been loyal to Robert for decades. I didn't spread rumors or make accusations. Instead, I presented them with facts, carefully curated and delivered with a quiet authority. I showed them evidence of Amelia's mismanagement, of her increasingly erratic decisions, of the blatant disregard she had for the very principles Robert had instilled in the company. Robert always believed in long-term vision, I'd say, my voice calm and measured, while gesturing to a projected chart illustrating Amelia's short-sighted stock manipulations. This is not that. This is a frantic grab for quick cash, and it's jeopardizing everything he built. I reminded them of Robert's integrity, his commitment to fair play, his unwavering belief in the power of collaboration. I subtly highlighted how Amelia's actions were a direct contradiction to those values. The whispers began, not of my vengeance, but of Amelia's recklessness. The seeds of doubt I'd sown at the gala had sprouted, and now they were taking root in the very soil of Sterling Enterprises. David was my final piece, the most sensitive one. I met him in a neutral location, a quiet park cafe miles from Amelia's influence. He looked hollowed out, the weight of his betrayal pressing down on him. He confessed everything, the pressure, the manipulation, the guilt. He admitted that Amelia had played on his fears, his insecurities, his desire for an easy life. He'd believed her lies because they were easier to believe than the difficult truth. "Mom," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." She made it sound so logical. "I know, David," I said, my voice softening, but not with forgiveness, rather with a profound weariness. Amelia is very persuasive when she wants something. But Robert's legacy isn't just about logic, David. It's about trust. And you broke that trust. I didn't demand he divorce her or disavow her completely. That would have been too much, too sudden. Instead, I asked him to do one thing. I asked him to cooperate with Henderson and Vance, to provide any documentation he had, any emails, any messages. I asked him to be honest. And surprisingly, he agreed. The dawning horror in his eyes at the gala had solidified into a grim determination. He wanted to right his wrong, even if he didn't yet know how. The legal proceedings were swift and brutal, once the full scope of Amelia's fraud was laid bare. Henderson presented the evidence, the offshore accounts, the falsified valuations, the illegal diversions of funds. Amelia's lawyer tried to argue intent, to claim misunderstanding, but the sheer volume of irrefutable proof rendered their defense moot. The Shell Corporation was dissolved, the assets frozen, and a significant portion of her personal fortune, meticulously traced back to the misappropriated Sterling funds, was seized. The house, the magnificent estate that had become the symbol of my humiliation, was ordered to be sold to satisfy the restitution.
It was a public spectacle, a downfall played out in the stark light of the courtroom, stripped of all its gilded pretense. The day the judgment was handed down was a crisp autumn afternoon. I sat in the back of the courtroom, a silent observer. Amelia, looking pale and diminished, her designer suit seeming to hang off her frame, didn't even look at me. David sat beside her, his face a mask of stoic misery, his hand resting on her arm in a gesture that felt more like obligation than affection. When the gavel fell, signaling the end of her reign, a collective sigh swept through the gallery. It wasn't triumph I felt, but a hollow, profound quiet. The storm had passed. Amelia's fall from grace was absolute. The Sterling name, once synonymous with power and prestige, was now tainted by her avarice. She vanished from public life, a pariah, her reputation in tatters. David, liberated from Amelia's suffocating influence, but forever marked by his involvement, began the slow, arduous process of rebuilding his own life, seeking solace and redemption in the very charities Robert had supported. He and I started to mend, not with grand gestures, but with quiet conversations, with shared silences, with the slow, painstaking reconstruction of trust. It wouldn't be the same as it was before, but it would be something real. My resolution wasn't a triumphant return to the estate, nor a grand celebration. It was far simpler, far more potent. Henderson facilitated the sale of the estate, the proceeds from which, after legal fees and restitution, were reinvested directly into Sterling Enterprises, shoring up its finances and securing its future. Arthur became my trusted advisor, a confidant, and a bridge to Robert's world. Eleanor Vance, now a valued member of my team, helped me restructure the Sterling Foundation, ensuring its transparency and its continued philanthropic mission, a mission free from the shadows of corruption. I didn't move back into a grand house. Instead, I purchased a stylish, modern penthouse apartment in the city. It was understated, elegant, and most importantly, mine. From its sweeping windows, I could see the city skyline, a testament to the world Robert had built, a world I was now not just protecting, but actively shaping. I was Martha Sterling, not just the widow, not just the mother, but the steward of a legacy, a force to be reckoned with. The final act wasn't about vengeance, though the memory of Amelia's betrayal still burned. It was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, and the integrity of everything Robert had worked for. It was about proving that true strength lies not in ownership, but in stewardship, not in manipulation, but in unwavering principle. The humiliation had been a crucible, forging me into something harder, something stronger. The silence that followed had been a fertile ground for strategy. The control I had now was not over people, but over destiny, over the future.
And as I looked out at the glittering expanse of the city, a sense of profound peace washed over me. The fight had been long, brutal, and deeply personal, but I had won. And the world that had tried to erase me, would now know the enduring power of Martha Sterling.